honored and pleased to speak to you about our work in this area, and happy to recognize the important service that's provided by ElderServe, run by your member, Harriet Friedlander, also the vital services provided by the Alzheimer's Association of Cleveland, managed by Terry Shirk, who's here as a guest. I have a message about this disease, and that's that there is progress being made, and there's something we can do about it. There's something we can do about it now. I'll start by reading a short quote from Ralph Waldo Emerson, who would have been a Rotarian if someone had invited him. He says, "Memory, without it all life and thought were in unrelated succession. As gravity holds matter from flying off into space, so memory gives stability to knowledge. It is the cohesion which keeps things from falling into a lump. It gives continuity and dignity to human life. It holds us to our family, to our friends." This was written by Emerson in 1879 when he was 76, which is 6 years before he died of Alzheimer's disease. Since that time, we have an understanding of what this disease is. We have an idea about what we can do to influence its development. It wasn't defined for the first time until 1907, but it's a specific cause of dementia. So a patient has dementia when they have a difficulty with memory, language, visual spatial functioning, perception, abstraction, general information, general behavior. So the word dementia is just a classification of symptoms and signs. It's not a disease itself. Senile dementia refers only to a person having dementia being over the age of 65. So senile dementia is not a disease. So you know immediately if any doctor ever tells you about a loved one that that's their diagnosis, you know that they don't know what they're talking about. Because every patient needs to have a specific diagnosis as well as we can possibly do it. Alzheimer's disease, unfortunately, is the commonest cause of dementia in North America and Europe. We now know that it is associated with deposits in the brain of a substance called amyloid beta, which I'll just refer to as amyloid. But the phrase amyloid means it's a protein, and it's composed of protein chains that are very tightly bound to one another. And it is very stable and difficult for the body to digest. And also in its intermediate forms, it's toxic and it kills neurons. And I brought an example of amyloid here, and I have it with me somewhere, and silk is amyloid. So the physical chemical characteristics are the same. It is a different protein. I'm not saying that the brain protein is silk, but it has a similar structure. So silk is very strong and difficult to digest. So if you spill coffee on your tie, stain will be there for decades, as long as you continue to wear it. So the amyloid in the brain is difficult for the body to remove, and in its early forms, it's toxic. However, we know some things about what creates it. And the message is a question really of balance. It's the most probably important word in regard to aging. Because after all, aging is inevitable. Everybody ages. But actually, that's wrong. Everybody ages in the sense that we're all aging from one day to the other. We're one day older today than we were yesterday. However, John Kennedy Jr., he's not aging. Everyone in this room undoubtedly has loved ones who died before they had an opportunity to be old. So the question of aging is not to consider it some horrible thing that happens to everybody, because many people don't get to be old, And those people who do should consider it an opportunity. It's an opportunity to make as much of that as possible, to maintain function as long as possible, and to maintain the highest level of health, function, and absence of disease. So, just for example, we in our group have shown, and many others have shown, a high-fat diet, hypertension, diabetes, stroke, obesity, physical inactivity, a lifetime of mental inactivity, low levels of education, and head injuries, low levels of consumption of fruit and vegetables. This is all summarized in the one-page handout. All of this, these are all risk factors for Alzheimer's disease. There are also genetic risk factors. However, the most important risk factor for the disease enhances risk, and it probably deals with lipids or fat metabolism. That's a very good cue to us that diet and metabolism are important. So it's important to avoid obesity and high-fat diet. There are many inherited forms of the disease. However, they usually occur before the age of 65, and they're quite uncommon. So there are less than 1% of cases. The vast majority of cases are sporadic. So when I consider the opportunity of aging, I'd like to present the idea that we have 3 goals. I say we, I mean everyone really. And this does not apply only to older persons. It includes children and middle-aged people. The 3 goals are, the first one may be summarized as not dying. That's a reasonable goal. We all have that. We would prefer to be alive, and we prefer to survive to be old. Second, we don't want to have diseases. We want to be free of cancer, heart disease, stroke, and many other things. However, I'd like to add a third thing, which is really equally important, which is we want to maintain the highest level of functional capacity. I call it also saludogenesis, which is from the Latin root salud, which you say in Spanish, salud, to health, to the maintenance of health. So the question of aging is not only not dying, not being sick, it's being healthy. And the point of this is, if you do get a disease when you're old, when you're young also, but we're talking about aging, if you get some problem when you're aged, you will be influenced by that disease in regard to how healthy you are, which is why I gave a little diagram on the back that shows on the right the manifestations of brain disease in aging are not caused only by the impairment of brain tissue and not only by the decline of brain function, but by your reserve capacities. And the reserve capacities I define as cerebral reserve, physical, psychological, and social reserve. So the question here in regard to how the risk of Alzheimer's disease can be lowered is one of enhancing cerebral, physical, psychological, and social reserve. For example, people who have had a stroke are at a higher risk of getting Alzheimer's disease, even if it's a relatively minor stroke. And about 20 to 30% of older persons have had a stroke and they don't know they've had a stroke. Hypertension is a risk factor for the disease. It's important to monitor and control hypertension. Head injuries is a risk factor, even if they're not major, even minor head injuries, as may be suffered by people playing football or, of course, motorcycle accidents and so on. even if there was no serious sequelae of the individual injuries. The best model here may be LeBron James. So he's a really big guy, he's very talented. If he had to carry a 50-pound pack on his back, he would still be a very good basketball player. His function would decline, but probably not that much. If I had to carry a 50-pound pack on my back, my basketball abilities, which are limited, would be declined enormously. I probably could no longer dunk the ball. Similarly, Alzheimer's disease, unfortunately, is very common. So approximately half of people 85 have it. However, recent studies have shown many people at that age have the disease in the brain, but they do not have dementia. So of course, it may be if they live to be 90 or 100, they will develop that, but at least there they are, they're 85, and they are tested. They do not have any impairment, and they may, let's say they die of a heart attack, and the brain shows that they had the disease in the brain, but they didn't have the impairment. So the explanation for that is that their reserve capacity, including their physical function, the psychological and social environment, and their cerebral capacity, cerebral reserve was high. So they were highly educated. Well, I'm not saying they had to be highly educated. That's one possibility. Or they had an intellectually rich life. So it's important that we all pursue a life which involves learning, not only when we're young, but also in middle and later ages. And of course, the Rotary is an example of a mechanism facilitating a lifetime of learning. For social reserve, it's good for people to be in supportive environments at all stages of life, and to deal with stress as well as possible. At the University of Louisville, our research group involves scientists in the Department of Neurology, biochemistry, pharmacology, and medicine, and we have collaborators at several universities in the United States and in Cambridge, in England. We're looking at what is the initiation of dementia, and particularly Alzheimer's and also Parkinson's disease. So we have an idea what might be responsible. We have identified a virus which has a similar structure to the amyloid protein, specifically for Alzheimer's disease. And we're developing a vaccine which we're testing in animals to be used for the treatment or possibly prevention of the disease. This is a virus which has received very little attention because it affects plants. However, plant viruses are present in food, and it's not commonly recognized that we're all exposed to viruses in plants. And there is actually live pepper virus in Tabasco sauce. However, before anyone makes any decisions about this information, plant viruses do not harm anyone as far as anybody knows. But we have discovered that everyone out of 60 subjects we tested had antibodies to the tobacco mosaic virus, which affects over 175 different plants. And our theory is that antibodies to different viruses of plants could be protective and help to make and keep people healthy. So we're developing that. We've also identified an environmental protein which is present in the body, which in a bacteria, which could be the initiating agent for the disease. And we're looking into mechanisms to test this hypothesis and to see if it could be used in regard to developing a preventive measure. A good example of the power of prevention is the comparison between the disease in Africa and in North America. So I've studied Alzheimer's disease in Cleveland and also in Kenya, in the Kikuyu, which is the largest ethnic group in Kenya, in Arabs in Israel, and in African American and white subjects in Cleveland and Louisville. And we and others have found Alzheimer's disease is less common in Africans, in black Africans. Alzheimer's disease is more common in African Americans. And no one could say for certain, but I believe it's very likely that the difference is not genetic, because there's no reason to think that the genes of Africans would be so completely different from the genes of African Americans, because they only originated from Africa several hundred years ago, which isn't a very long time for genes to change. However, the clue is obesity, stroke, heart disease, diabetes, and hypertension are all very uncommon in elderly Africans. Obesity, diabetes, hypertension, heart disease, stroke, high-fat diet, and physical inactivity are all relatively more common in African Americans. So African Americans have a higher risk, Africans have a lower risk. It's likely that the difference is because of these environmental factors involving diet and lifestyle. The best way to understand this interaction is to consider the millennia of human evolution. So everyone here has certain genes. The latest estimate is we all have 27,700 genes. The reason we have these genes is because they were adaptive for us, for our ancestors. For 100,000 years of human evolution, they were selected for. But they were selected for in a different environment when our ancestors were hunter-gatherers. They were not selected because they were good in the current culture where we have remote controls, cell phones, and computers. So we have no couch potato genes. Our genes were made at a time when every person was very physically active. I think they were more mentally active than many people, because you had to pay attention. If you wanted to drink, you had to go get something to drink, go to the water source. You had to pay attention to the time of day, to the weather, to the animals that might also be there, who might have harmful intent. So the genes we have are not helpful to protect us from a high-fat diet, or to protect us from dietary excess, or to maintain our health while we are physically inactive. So physical activity is really the key to so many things, including cerebral reserve, physical, psychological, and social reserve. It enhances the production of growth factors in the brain that help to make the neurons resilient and resistant to damage. So I recommend these things on the handout. Everything should be discussed with your primary physician before you make any changes in your lifestyle. I also have a short abstract from a paper we published recently about our proposal. So the NIH had a consensus conference where they considered the evidence about protective factors against the development of Alzheimer's disease, and they convened a group of 20 experts. And as you know, there's nothing more dangerous than an expert. So they reviewed the evidence and they said, well, there's no double-blind placebo-controlled trial of these preventive factors. So in this short paper, we suggested that such a trial should be done, and we'll try to recruit 10,000 people and assign them to 40 years of high-fat diet, or 40 years of head injury, or 40 years of cigarette smoking. The idea is you can't do that. So just because there is no convincing evidence, that doesn't mean we can't make a reasonable recommendation, which I hope you'll agree what I'm making are reasonable recommendations, because they're all known to be good for you anyway, which is to have an intellectually meaningful life, to be physically active. This doesn't mean you have to do crossword puzzles, because recent evidence, Charlie, is that only the down is good, not the cross. But I think crossword puzzles are fine. I'm worried that people like me, I don't like to do crossword puzzles. So it doesn't matter. Whatever you do, if it should involve learning and involve interaction with other people and involve ideas and thought. So if you're reading a book and you fall asleep, the pages do not continue to turn by themselves. Unlike television, which wouldn't know if you died or not. It's okay to eat meat, but consider the fact that our ancestors ate meat, but they only ate meat when they were successful hunting, which wasn't every day. And if they did kill an elephant, they didn't have a refrigerator. So they ate more grain, more fiber, they ate more vitamins, less calories, more protein, less salt. So in this population we studied in Africa, they said the main health problem in aging Kikuyu men was low blood pressure. They never had heart attacks. So I see the time is coming near, and I'm very happy to answer questions. I would like to conclude by saying about the answers to the question of why people get Alzheimer's disease in the absence of these genes, which are very rare. Why do they get it? I think we can answer this question, and the question is not when, it's not if we will do that or not, but when. And I would like to be able to do this here in Louisville. And finally, there's another quote from Emerson. He said, "A man is what he thinks about all day long." So I guess you could say that about aging. The quality of aging is related to what you think about all day long, what your body is doing all day long, what you're eating all day long, what injuries you subject yourself to all day long, and how you're able to manage and enhance your physical, psychological, social, and cerebral reserve capacities to maintain health with age. Thank you very much.